and welcome to the session on medieval philosophers St. Thomas Aquinas. In the previous units, we have covered the life and thoughts of the major medieval thinkers starting from 4th century to 11th century. We have also seen that by 11th century, the intellectual landscape of the Western Europe began to change. The period following this, that is 12th, 13th and 14th centuries, are generally referred to as High Middle Ages. In this unit, we will look at one of the most important figures of 13th century medieval philosophy, St. Thomas Aquinas. Historical background. Before we proceed to analyze the philosophical ideas of Aquinas, it is necessary that we understand the period he lived in. That will help us understand his works and ideas in a better way. Scholars consider High Middle Ages as the golden age of medieval philosophy. There happened 4 major developments during this period which impacted the course of Western philosophy in unprecedented ways. Those events were the growth of universities, the rediscovery of the works of Aristotle, the influence of Arabian, Jewish and Byzantine philosophies, and the establishment of the Franciscan order and the Dominican order within the Christian Church. Thus, Thomas Aquinas lived at a critical juncture of Western philosophy when rediscovery of Aristotelian corpus reopened the question of the relation between faith and reason. Until 13th century only, the early works of Aristotle were known to the philosophers of the Western world, that too in the form of translations and commentaries. But by the turn of 13th century, the entire body Aristotle's writing was made available in Latin. This had a huge impact on medieval Western philosophers and thinkers. The introduction of Aristotle's ideas called into question the many of the philosophical as well as theological ideas that were prevalent during the previous centuries. As a result, medieval theology and philosophy faced a major crisis which was further accelerated with the establishment of medieval universities. In an attempt to solve this crisis, the thinkers of the 13th century attempted to reconcile the ideas of Aristotle with those of Christianity. St. Thomas Aquinas was one of the leading figures who tried to erase the incompatibility between Aristotelian and Christian ideas. His works are noted for their remarkable precision and organization of thoughts. It is generally believed that Aquinas was finally able to reconcile Aristotelian and Christian viewpoints through his masterpiece Summa Theologica, a biographical sketch of St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas, who is also known by other names such as Thomas of Aquin or Aquino, was an Italian theologian and philosopher who belonged to the scholastic tradition. He was also a Dominican friar and priest and is often regarded as the greatest proponent of natural theology during the medieval period. Aquinas was the father of Thomism and contributed greatly to the development of many areas of Western philosophy such as ethics, natural law, metaphysics and political theory. It can be rightly said that modern philosophy was influenced by his ideas so much so that many of modern philosophical ideas were conceived either as a development or as a refutation of his philosophical thoughts. St. Thomas Aquinas was born in AD 1225 in Roccasecca, a place in Italy. At the age of 5, he was sent to the abbey of Monte Cassino to get educated among Benedictine monks. He was an intellectually gifted child. According to some sources, he repeatedly asked the question, "What is God?" to his benefactors. It is interesting to note that he took up this question as a major theme in his later theological works. He remained at the monastery till he was 13 years old, and then he spent the next 5 years pursuing his primary education at a Benedictine house in Naples. It was during these years he studied the works of Aristotle. As you will see in later modules, Aristotle became a major influence on his philosophical exploration. He also became familiar with the ideas of the Islamic Jewish thinkers such as Averroes and Moses Maimonides. It is interesting to note that Aquinas became one of the major critics of Averroes during the 13th century. During his stay at Naples, Aquinas came to know more about some of the newly established clerical orders, and he was influenced by a Dominican preacher. At the age of 19, he decided to join the Dominican order, but this decision was opposed by his family. He was kidnapped by his own family and was kept as a prisoner in the family castle for a year. His family tried their best to dissuade him from entering the Dominican order, but without any success. When he was finally released from captivity, Aquinas went back to become a Dominican. He was later ordained, after which he studied theology at the University of Paris. Aquinas' theological career is a long and interesting one. He was trained under the Dominican scholar Albert Magnus. Aquinas was an exemplary scholar, but was slow in manner and was modest. As a result, he was nicknamed Dumbbox by his classmates. However, he wrote a thesis which hugely impressed Albertus Magnus, who proclaimed thus after reading the thesis, "We call this young man a dumbbox, but his bellowing in doctrine will one day resound throughout the world." History proves Albertus Magnus' statement to be true. In the following years, Aquinas spent his time traveling, teaching theology, and serving various offices within the Dominican order. He composed most of his major works during this period, and those works were highly influential. Averism or radical Aristotelianism was becoming strong in the medieval universities at that time. Aquinas disagreed with the principles of Averism, and he wrote 2 books arguing that the principles of Averism were not compatible with Christianity. Aquinas opposed the Averistic interpretations of Aristotle throughout his works and spent his life trying to reconcile faith and reason. Aquinas also got into disputes with some of the major thinkers of the Franciscan order, such as Bonaventure. He died on 7th March 1274. 2 centuries later, he was declared as a doctor of the Church. Works and philosophical, theological ideas. Aquinas was a prolific writer, and he composed around 60 works during his lifetime. However, he is best known for his masterpiece, Summa Theologica. His writings were philosophical and theological in nature. Some of his major works include Summa Theologica, Summa Contra Gentiles, Commentary on the Sentences, a commentary on Peter Lombard's 4 books of sentences, on Being and Essence, written for the Dominican monks in Paris, Against those who assail the worship of God and religion, a treatise defending mendicant orders. He is also known for the commentaries he wrote on the works of Aristotle, including On the Soul, Nicomachean Ethics, and Metaphysics. Aquinas' philosophical and theological writings became extremely popular and controversial shortly after his death. They were highly influential among the followers of the Dominican order. His Summa Theologica was used as leading textbook on theology for several centuries after his death. Aquinas' works can be seen as investigations into the philosophy of religion. The divine attributes of God, such as omnipotence, omniscience, eternity, and benevolence, were major themes of his works. Apart from studying these divine attributes, he offered a new explanation for the relationship between faith and reason. Aquinas' ideas on metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and politics were drawn mainly from St. Augustine of Hippo. One of his major contributions was the 5 arguments he proposed proving the existence of God, which we will analyze in detail in the next module. Summa Theologica. As the name suggests, Summa Theologica is a theological summary. In this work, he attempted to describe the relationship between man and God. He explored how Jesus Christ's death made man's reconciliation with God possible. He provided proofs for the existence of God and elaborated on the nature of God. A major part of the work is devoted to examining the nature and purpose of human beings. He wrote this book in a typical scholastic manner. The style of this argument is as follows. Firstly, he raised objections against a particular point of a theological doctrine. Secondly, he stated the orthodox position on that matter by citing a scriptural authority. Thirdly, he developed a philosophical reasoning to justify the position. Finally, he negates the objections raised initially using philosophical reasoning. Aquinas proposed 5 ways to prove the existence of God in Summa Theologica. Some scholars are of the opinion that his definition of a just war, based on Augustine, and his meditations on natural law continue to influence even the contemporary world. Summa Theologica stands as a testimony to Aquinas' conviction that the majority of theological doctrines can be expressed and codified in a comprehensive system using reason alone. Rejection of Averist rationalism. We have already seen that medieval thinkers disagreed on how to unite two kinds of knowledge: the knowledge that is obtained through divine revelation, theology, faith and scriptures; knowledge that is derived from the information observed naturally through mind and senses, reason and philosophy. It was generally agreed that there is an incompatibility between these two kinds of knowledge, but Aquinas denied this basic conflict between faith and reason. He tried to demonstrate that reason could be used to understand many great spiritual truths which we accept on faith. He fought against the secular interpretations of Aristotle, especially Latin Averism, and attacked the teachings of Averroes on the grounds that they denied the immortality of the individual soul. Averroes had proposed theory of the double truth, which argued that both these kinds of knowledge were directly opposed to each other. Aquinas rejected this view altogether. He argued that both these kinds of knowledge come ultimately from God and hence they are in harmony with each other. He asserted that faith and reason, theology and philosophy were not only compatible with each other, but they could work in association with one another. Faith and divine revelation helps reason by preventing it from making mistakes. At the same time, reason can help to clarify and demystify faith and many theological doctrines. 5 proofs for the existence of God. In the previous unit on St. Anselm of Canterbury, we analyzed the ontological argument he developed to prove the existence of God. Aquinas also proposed 5 proofs to prove God's existence in the first part of Summa Theologica, a book that dealt with many aspects of theology in a comprehensive manner. The most important foundation of theology is the existence of God. Therefore, Aquinas attempted to establish the crucial fact that God exists, without which the other arguments in Summa Theologica would be pointless. The 5 ways he proposed are: 1. Argument based on motion. 2. Argument based on cause and effect. 3. Argument based on contingency or necessary being. 4. Argument based on gradation. 5. Teleological argument. Proof based on motion. We can observe that some things in the universe are in motion, but the movements of those things are not caused by themselves. Whatever is in motion is put into motion by another object that is in motion. This second object in turn is put on to motion by yet another object. This forms a chain of motion where an object is put into motion by another object whose motion is caused by yet another object, and so on and so forth. However, there can be no infinite chain of causes of motion, that is, we cannot trace the causes of motion by tracing them backward till infinity. This means that there has to be someone who is the first mover. This first mover is an immovable mover, which means the first mover is not moved by anything else. Aquinas argued that this first and immovable mover is God. Proof based on cause and effect. We can see that the things in this universe are caused by something, but nothing can be caused for itself. Everything that is caused and is caused by something else. Every cause is dependent on a prior cause. However, it is impossible to trace the cause backward till infinity. Therefore, there must be an uncaused cause of all that is caused. That means, there should be a first cause who is not caused by anything else. Aquinas argued that this first cause is God. Proof based on contingency. We can observe that many things in the universe may either exist or not exist. These things are finite and are called contingent beings. It is not possible that everything in the universe is contingent. If all things were contingent, there would be a time when nothing existed. But if nothing ever existed, then nothing would exist even now, because everything that exists requires something that already existed to bring them to existence. Hence, there has to be a necessary being whose existence is not contingent on any other thing. Since everything in the universe depends upon other things for their existence, there should be at least one thing that is not dependent on anything else for its existence. This is called a necessary being. Aquinas argued that this necessary being is God. Proof based on degree. We can observe that the things in the universe have got varying degrees of perfections. For example, some things are more good, more true or more noble, while some other things are less good, less true or less noble. We can measure these varying degrees only in comparison to something which has ultimate perfection. This means there must be something which is the best, the truest or the noblest. Thus, we need an ultimate standard of perfection. Therefore, there must be something that is the cause of being, goodness and every other perfection. Aquinas argued that this ultimate perfection is God. Proof based on teleological argument. Aquinas' fifth proof is based on teleological argument. The teleological argument is also called the argument from design. We can observe that the inanimate and non-intelligent objects in the universe act towards the best possible purpose or a final cause. But these objects are not aware of doing so. These objects are in themselves unintelligent. Acting towards an end is the characteristics of intelligence. Therefore, it is clear that these objects achieve their purpose not by sheer chance, but they are directed according to a plan. That is, any inanimate and non-intelligent object in the world acts towards a purpose according to the direction of a being which possesses knowledge and intelligence. Therefore, there exists an intelligent being that guides all natural bodies toward their ends. Aquinas argued that this intelligent being is God. In the above mentioned arguments, we can see that Aquinas used observation of the natural world to establish arguments 1, 2 and 5. He used rational speculation to propose arguments 3 and 4. Other major philosophical ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas. In addition to the proofs for the existence of God, Aquinas contributed a number of other philosophical ideas to medieval Western philosophy. It is not possible to analyze all of them comprehensively in this unit. However, we will take a quick glance at some of his major contributions without a detailed analysis. 1. Just war. The idea of just war was first proposed by Augustine of Hippo. He argued that even though Christians should be peacekeepers, defense can be used as a means of preserving peace. Aquinas borrowed this idea of Augustine and defined certain conditions under which a war could be called just war. In Summa Theologica, he proposed the following conditions. The purpose of war shouldn't be for acquiring wealth or power. Instead, war should occur for a good and just purpose. Not everyone should wage a war. Instead, it should be done by an instituted authority such as the state. Even amidst violence, the central motive of just war should be the restoration of peace. Faith and reason. Like many of his predecessors, Aquinas was also concerned about the relation between faith and reason. The struggle of how to reconcile the relationship between faith and reason was much evident in the times of Aquinas. There existed two major tendencies during this period. One of the tendencies was to suppress reason in favor of faith and theology. Another newly emerged tendency was that of avarist rationalism, which attempted to divide faith from reason. Aquinas rejected both these tendencies in his writings. He considered theology as a science. The raw material data of theology consists of the written scriptures and the tradition of the Roman Catholic Church. God has revealed this date to individuals and groups of people throughout history. Faith and reason are two distinct matters, but they are related. Aquinas maintained the view that both faith and reason are two tools using which the data of theology can be processed. He believed that a combination of both was necessary to achieve the true knowledge of God. Thus, he combined Greek philosophy and Christian doctrine and suggested that rational thinking and the study of nature were ways to understand truths pertaining to God. He argued that God reveals himself through nature, so to study nature is to study God. He proposed that the goal of theology is to grasp the truth about God through the use of reason and to experience salvation through that truth. Natural law theory. Aquinas contributed to the branch of moral philosophy by developing the natural law theory. For several centuries, this theory remained as one of the most dominant views regarding moral principles. To put simply, natural law theory states that God endorses specific moral standards and fixes them in human nature. Human beings discover these moral standards through rational intuition. 4 kinds of law. St. Thomas Aquinas distinguished between 4 kinds of law. They are natural law, positive law, eternal law and divine law. Natural law. According to Aquinas, the natural law is what guides the actions of a natural being towards their respective aims. Borrowing from the Greek idea, he argued that naturalness is the perfect criterion for distinguishing the right from the wrong. What is natural can be identified with right, while what is unnatural can be identified with wrong. However, he differed from the Greek theory on one important count. To him, natural inclinations ultimately rest on God. It is God who governs everything and gives them their specific characters so that perfection can be achieved. Natural laws does not include specific cases. Instead, they aim at providing general rules of conduct. Positive law. Aquinas defined the positive law as the law established by instituted authorities such as the states. He argued that positive laws should be the expression and a derivation of the natural law. Eternal law. Eternal law is the unchanging divine governance of God who governs all the creations in the universe. In the case of rational beings, eternal law depends on reason and is put into action through free will. It works toward the accomplishment of man's spiritual goals. Divine law. It is a revealed subset of eternal law. Divine law is generally given through scriptures and other divine texts. Divine law have 2 purposes. Firstly, it safeguards human beings against the possible errors that can happen while we try to obtain natural law through rational reflection. Secondly, it protects us from the errors that can happen while deriving human laws. Thus, moral laws can be discovered through reflection derived by instituted authorities and legislations or found in scriptures, but all these moral laws are ultimately based on an objective, universal and unchanging eternal law. Cardinal virtues and theological virtues. Aquinas made a distinction between cardinal virtues and theological virtues. Also, he defined both these categories. According to Aquinas, cardinal virtues are natural and revealed in nature. Therefore, they are applicable to every human being. There are 4 cardinal virtues, namely prudence, temperance, justice and fortitude. The object of the theological virtues is God. The 3 theological virtues are faith, hope and charity. Aquinas' theory of knowledge. Aquinas was of the view that for the knowledge of any truth, human beings need divine help. The intellect of humans need to be moved to action by God. But he did not rely on divine revelation completely. Aquinas argued that human beings possess the natural capacity to know many things without special divine revelation. But divine revelation occurs from time to time in matters related to faith. Critics of St. Thomas Aquinas. Although Aquinas was very popular among medieval thinkers, he was met with heavy criticism during his lifetime and after his death. Members of the Franciscan order vigorously criticized him on various grounds. The major Franciscan critics of Aquinas were Saint Bonaventure and Duns Scotus. They criticized Aquinas for the excessive importance he gave to reason in matters of faith. Disagreeing with Aquinas, Scotus argued that reason has only a limited ability to explore matters related to faith. Modern philosophers are divided on the merits of Aquinas' works. One of his major critics of modern period was Bertrand Russell, who criticized Aquinas' works for lacking original thought. According to Russell, Aquinas' appeal to reason in his arguments is insincere because his conclusions are fixed in advance. In Russell's own words, before he begins to philosophize, he already knows the truth. It is declared in the Catholic faith. However, Aquinas' works and ideas impacted the growth and development of both philosophy and theology for many years. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. St. Thomas Aquinas was a leading theologian and philosopher of the 13th century. He was also a Dominican priest who composed many works on the nature of God and man. He lived in a period when the Western world was witnessing massive changes both historically and intellectually. As a result, his works were influenced by these changes. Aquinas tried to solve the crisis generated by the introduction of Aristotelian corpus and tried to erase the differences between Christian and Aristotelian worldviews. His best known work is Summa Theologica, in which he dealt with various aspects of theology and philosophy. A major contribution of Aquinas was the 5 arguments he proposed to prove the existence of God. These arguments were based on motion, cause and effect, gradation, contingency and teleology. Moreover, he suggested a new relationship between faith and reason. Aquinas held the view that faith and reason are not in opposition with each other. Instead, they can work in collaboration in many matters related to faith. However, he maintained the view that some theological doctrines can't be complemented with reason, hence they have to be accepted on the basis of scriptural authority. He was heavily criticized by thinkers of the Franciscan order and later by Bertrand Russell. His ideas on just war, natural law, theories of knowledge and ethics continued to exercise influence on medieval as well as modern philosophers in varying degrees. Now, you can try to answer for these questions. What was the speciality of the period in which St. Thomas Aquinas lived? What were the major contributions of Aquinas in the field of philosophy and theology? What was the content and style of Summa Theologica? What was Aquinas' proof based on motion to prove the existence of God? What was Aquinas' proof based on cause and effect to prove the existence of God? Describe Aquinas' argument for the existence of God based on contingency. How did Aquinas prove the existence of God by citing the varying degrees of perfection among the things of the universe? What was Aquinas' teleological argument for the existence of God? How did Aquinas justify just war? What was Aquinas' position on the much debated issue of the relation between faith and reason? How did Aquinas distinguish between cardinal virtues and theological virtues? Now, you can go through these books for reference. A History of Philosophy, Volume 2, Medieval Philosophy, From Augustine to Duns Scotus, by Frederick Copleston, The Newman Press, Westminster, in 1950. The Routledge History of Philosophy, Volume 3, The Middle Ages, edited by John Marenbon, Routledge, London, in 1998. A Companion to Philosophy in the Middle Ages, edited by George J. Garcia and Timothy B. Noon, Blackwell Publishing, Berlin in 2002. Medieval Philosophy, Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy by Scott MacDonald and Norman Kretschmann, edited by E. Craig, Routledge, London in 1998. Encyclopedia of Medieval Philosophy, Philosophy between 500 and 1500, Volume 1, edited by Peter Adamson and Henrik Lagerlund, Springer, New York in 2011. Medieval Western Philosophy, The European Emergence, Volume 9, by Patrick J. Aspel, Council for Research in Values, Washington in 1999. Thank you for watching this program. We can meet again with another topic. Till then, take care.